Well, hello, wonderful group of authors. So nice to see everybody. I'm so sad that we're not all in the same room. It's sort of made painfully real when I see these little boxes. But of course, the wonderful thing about seeing the little boxes is that we're able to include people who live a little bit further away than the rest of us. So the upside is that actually Zoom does somehow bring us all so beautifully together. And we're all here this evening to chat writing and literature and books and stories and what we've been up to. And I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves before we start having our conversations, and also ask the participants, if you've got any questions, to please put them in the Q&A function so that we can keep an eye on questions as they're coming in. And we will aim to stop talking about 15 minutes from the end of the hour to address specific questions from people who are in the audience. So I hope I've done all the housekeeping properly. Please, guys, my fellow participants in the round table, do shout if I've forgotten something crucial that I've been told to say and I haven't. So if I could start asking you to introduce yourselves, I will start with Helle. Could you tell us, say hello and who you are?
Yes, I'm Helle. I write under the name H.S. Norup. I'm originally from Denmark and now I live in Switzerland. I used to live in Singapore. I spent a lot of time in the mountains in Austria, so I'm a little bit all over the place. My first book for Pushkin was this one, The Missing Barbegasi, which takes place in the Austrian Alps. And my second book, which just came out, is The Hungry Ghost, and that one takes place in Singapore. It's about Freya, who moves from Denmark to Singapore. She's forced to move to live with her dad and his new family. She arrives in the Hungry Ghost Festival month, and on the first night in Singapore, she sees this mysterious girl in the garden, and she follows her to a graveyard, and so starts an adventure where she must find out who the girl is and unravel a mystery, uncover old family secrets, and so on. And it takes place both in contemporary Singapore, historical Singapore, and a fantasy world that's based on Chinese myth and Asian folklore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Ellie, would you like to say hello?
Hi, it's very nice to meet you all out there. I'm Ellie. I have been working in publishing for a very long time. I realised this morning, nearly half my life I've been working in publishing. So 10 years, that's a long time. No, actually, it's more like 20 plus. For much of that time, I was a children's book editor. And then I moved to the other side and became a children's book author and wrote my first book, Boy 87, when I was living in Ethiopia with my family. And 3 years later, we moved back to the UK, where I wrote Lost, which published earlier this year. And I would say more, but I'll probably not stop, and we have to hear from everybody else too. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much. Ayesha, can we welcome you all the way from Senegal?
Yes, where it's hot and there are monkeys teasing the dogs out here, so that's what you're hearing. My name is Ayesha, and I currently live in Senegal. I'm from Ghana originally, and I'm the author of 4 novels, including the newly released The Deep Blue Between, which Sarah helped birth into this world. And let's see, I live in a village of 5,000 people. It's by the ocean. It's really, really nice. And I spend my time writing and taking care of my 4-year-old and gardening and baking, sometimes unsuccessful treats. But yeah, that's me. And then I'll talk more about the book as we go along. So
thank you so much. So I think, Liz, that's a hook for you, the gardening, introduction through gardening.
Hello everyone. I saw someone come up saying that they were from Worcestershire, so that's very near where I am. I'm in Ludlow in South Shropshire, and like Ayesha, I like my gardening, and I'm a keen walker, which is why my hair looks a bit mad, because I just did a bit of a speed walk before this started. I'm the author of Bearmouth, which is my debut novel. Which Sarah was utterly instrumental in. I like birth. I like helping birth. That's a really nice way of putting it. It's a thriller, kind of coming of age thriller set down a working coal mine. It's inspired by history, but it's got elements of, I suppose, it's imagined history, I think. That's how a friend described it. I quite liked it, so I'm going to nick that. Nice. But yes, it's asked questions about revolution, about independence, and yeah, that's a bit about me, I suppose, really. I also, like Ellie, have kind of worked in publishing, more on the kind of publicity side. So my background, I worked at the BBC for quite a while doing publicity there, and then I left to go freelance. So I've worked on mad things like EastEnders and Whole Being Casualty, and then I worked in publishing for a bit as well. So
thank you very much. Thank you. Susie, can we say hello?
Hi everybody, I'm Susie Bower, and this is my book, School for Nobodies, which is a magical mystery story for 8 to 11-year-olds, and it came out with Pushkin in July this year, and it's been described as being about the beauty of not fitting in. It's all about Claudia Finkelbottom, who on her 10th birthday discovers 2 huge secrets about herself. The first one is that she has her real name tattooed on the back of her neck, and the second is that she has a twin, a secret twin, alive and at a nearby boarding school. She gets herself sent away and she ends up at the mysterious School for Nobodies, also known as the Cruet Establishment for Lost and Wayward Children, which is run by Mr. Felix Gold, who's an ex-circus clown, and the redoubtable Miss Euphemia Esmeralda Boudica Cruet, who makes the most disgusting soups in the world. And at the school, she meets misfit classmates, a sinister talking bird. She gets mysterious messages leading her towards her twin, and she finds her twin eventually in the one place she never dreamed of looking. 2 random things about me. I'm not a pantser. I don't know whether you've heard of the terms pantser and plotters. I am definitely a plotter, and I write 12,000 word outlines. And what else? Oh yeah, I think of writing as a process of making a sandwich.
You make a very good sandwich. And Kereen, hello.
Hello, my name is Kereen Getten. I am originally from Jamaica. I moved to England when I was 8 years old, and my first ever book, When Life Gives You Mangoes, is out. I was going to say it's coming out, but now we can say it's out. With Quick Press, and yeah, Sarah helped the book. She was brilliant with it, and yeah, it's that 12-year-old Clara, her best friend Gaynor, and also she can't remember what happened to her last summer until a new girl comes to the island who changes everything. They go on these adventures, find out family secrets, and slowly her memory returns.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask questions to start conversations, and I'm going to direct questions to certain people, to certain authors. So I'm going to start by asking Susie and Kereen, who are you writing for? And Susie, why don't you start that conversation? Who are you writing for?
Okay, I'm always a bit embarrassed when people ask me this, because I don't actually write for children as such. Yeah, I don't have a perfect kind of reader in mind. I write for the sake of the story. For me, it's a case of whatever the story needs, I will write, and that's it really. Yeah, I'm not writing for anything particular except for the story itself.
Well, I suspect that probably gives the story greater integrity, rather than having a notion of who the reader is. The purpose and the integrity of the story is the most important thing.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, I write very intuitively, so that's the way I write. I know a lot of people have a particular person in mind that they write for, etc., but that has never worked for me.
What about you, Kereen? Who's in your mind when you're writing your stories?
I mean, similar to Susie at the beginning, when I'm writing it, I'm not really thinking of who I'm writing it for. I'm just writing the story. But as the story develops and as I get towards the end, I start to think of the kind of people that would read it. And I really was writing it for young Black girls, Black children who don't see themselves in books very often. Black children who love reading but don't have books where they're going on adventures and they're having fun, and it's about being a child and it's about childhood. So I really wanted to write for them so that they had something or had more stories written for them and about them.
Lovely. I read something recently that, and I don't know who said it, but we are changed by what we see, just as we are changed when we are seen. And I think in all children's literature, that has real resonance for me, that books work on two levels, don't they? They allow us to see into worlds as well as potentially reflect our own worlds and give us a sense of ourselves. Ayesha, writing historical fiction, who do you write for?
I think I'm selfishly writing for myself. I'm writing books that I missed out on when I was growing up, because I was exposed to a lot of literature, but I rarely did see myself in those books. A lot of the books were given to us either in libraries at school or when I visited a grandparents, and a lot of those books were from other places. So when I did start writing my very first books, which weren't for children per se, I just wanted to write books in which, I would see myself, I would see my mom, I would see my siblings. Sorry, the ringing is my husband's phone and he's been banned from coming up, so.
That'll teach you.
No.
He's like sneaking up the stairs trying to go.
I know.
Like a ninja.
Yeah, like, well, my phone is going to ring anyway. I'm not coming, but my phone is going to disturb you. So then I start with myself, but then by extension, it's for other people I've grown up with and other people who have grown up in societies like mine, where a sense of your history has been erased. So you go into schools and you're fed a certain type of literature or a certain type of history, and you struggle to find yourself. So I just began to dig and to look for stories about my grandmother, about my great-grandmother, and then to turn those stories into stories that I love, which have adventure, which have love, which have all these elements that I found in all our books. So yeah, it starts from what I want to read, and then what I think my sisters might want to read, what my mom might want to read, and then it fans out from there.
Oh, well, that's lovely, and actually it leads very nicely onto my next question, which is how do your characters come to you? And I suspect it might be linked.
Yeah. Phone is ringing again. I need to turn it off. So it depends from book to book. In the last book I wrote before The Deep Blue Between, the character was based on a real life person, my great-great-grandmother, who I found out had been enslaved. And then as I was writing her story, the stories of Hassan and Husseina appeared to me, and this book follows those girls. And so they magically appeared or organically appeared in the writing. So I'm also not a pantser, I'm a very heavy plotter, but then I've begun to crystallize this writing process in which I marry the two. I do plot, but I let the story guide me. So as I'm writing, characters just fly in. Sometimes characters that I thought I am going to be working with are axed out of the process. So yeah, just allowing myself to feel the process, and the characters sometimes just appear organically. But the main characters, I just come, I guess, because I've been thinking of certain topics, or because I've heard a song, or I've heard a name, or I've heard something, and then I keep thinking about whatever theme it is, and then around that a character appears. So it's a number of different processes.
Yeah, interesting. And Hella.
I'm going to turn off the phone, so
thank you.
because it's going to keep happening.
All right. Hella, how do your characters come to you?
That's so difficult to say, but sorry.
I was saying, bearing in mind we have human and fantasy characters.
Yeah, for me, characters, they come first, and then the story develops from there, and the plot develops afterwards. But it is a lot of it is, of course, from own memories and people that I know, and in different connections and different bits of different people and so on. And then the fantasy creatures, I don't even know where they come from. I mean, when I first found the missing Barbagasi, or the Barbagasi, I didn't even know Barbagasi existed. I just knew this girl met this strange elf in the snow, and after she had met this strange elf in the snow, I started researching what kind of elves are in folklore that live in the snow. What can I find out about that? And I discovered that there were these myths about Barbagasis particularly in the high Alps in Switzerland and in France. And I could not find more than a few lines here and there about them, really nothing at all. So I developed a whole mythology around them myself, I would say, except for this, that they had these long feet, they could surf on avalanches, and they were known to save skiers or people on the mountains if there were avalanches. So I can't even tell you where they come from, except it's an idea that then develops by looking at pictures, looking at reading folklore, reading mythology, and also, of course, having a background of having read a lot of these of fairy tales and myths from around the world.
Wonderful. And what about Freya? With a very delightful character for anybody who hasn't read it. She's just adorable, worried, slightly. She's burdened by some things that have been happening to her, and yet she's extremely capable little girl. What was the inspiration for creating that character?
Well, I think in a way it was. Part of her comes from myself, definitely, and this whole, she's a scout, she wants to survive in the wilderness and so on. She's a lot more brave than I ever was, but that part of her definitely comes from me. But then also when we moved to Singapore and my boys started school in Singapore, and they were, well, the youngest was around this age, he was 12 when we moved there, and the kids at the school, the way they were just so used to adjusting. A lot of them had moved around a lot. We haven't moved around that much, but some of them were used to every second, third year, they would take up their whole life, move away from friends, have to find new friends. And they were so resilient, and they were just so used to this whole thing that they also were very welcoming towards newcomers. And I really remember the kids that took, especially the younger son. I mean, the first week he had 5 friends the first week, and they were just saying, "Oh, come on, we've all been the new kid." And I think a lot of her resilience also comes from seeing these kids that move around a lot, and I'm used to that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So Ellie, why is literature good at introducing difficult subjects to children? Or how is literature good at introducing difficult subjects to children?
I guess I have written about some difficult subjects, and I didn't set out to write about difficult subjects. I wrote about things that I really care about, and they tend to be things that around us. They're events based on events that are happening in the world today, and they are current events, and they're things that kids will see snippets of in the news. Their friends will talk about it. Their parents, they might overhear discussions between their parents talking about these things, but it's fragments. And for me, a book is an opportunity to provide children with a framework, a structure, something which can offer some sort of way for them to explore the ideas and the moralities involved in those events, to give them the tools to make up their own minds about how they feel about those events. Something they can revisit and discuss, something a bit more permanent. And I think when you're writing for younger readers, you do have to have slightly more defined moralities for them to navigate with in the book. You can't leave things quite as open as perhaps you could in an adult novel, but I think it's just expanding on what's already happening in their worlds.
Yeah. And Liz, how do you, because Baremouth 2 deals with some pretty weighty subjects for young readers. How does that work for you in terms of what are you wanting your literature to do in terms of introducing, well, not necessarily even introducing children to things, because they, as Eddie says, they usually are very conscious of those issues.
I think it's that thing with children is that, you know, is not to patronise them. And one of the things that I always find so amazing when I work with kids is that how well informed they are. They're a lot of them are really politically engaged. They're really well informed, and they're much more sort of politically active than I was at their age, and that I think my generation was, in a way, certainly at such a young age. You know, sort of speak to 10, 11, 12-year-olds, and I think you don't have to be afraid of introducing them to difficult subjects. You're not, like you say, you're not introducing them, they're already aware of it, but it is about how you can tell stories, how you can tell the story that you want to tell that touches on some of those themes, really. I mean, like kind of Susie was saying, I sort of don't, I kind of write for myself, really. It is sort of a, I mean, it kind of is selfish, but I think you can only ever really write for yourself. But I do always bear in mind the kids that I kind of work with as well. And I think it gives you a good kind of boundary in terms of what you can and can't do, and I think you can pretty much write about anything in a children's book. You can tackle pretty much any subject. I think that's a good thing to be doing, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think kids see it as difficult themselves. I think as adults we sometimes think, oh, that's quite a difficult subject, you know, talking about kind of, you know, child minors, talking about exploitation, talking about things like the importance of asking questions and the importance of challenging the status quo. But they're things that kids are sort of doing anyway, you know. But I think as adults, sometimes we kind of don't always realise that.
I think as well there's a tendency for adults to feel that they need to keep things from children, which is always something that completely mystifies me, because generally children know what's going on, and they're very conscious of the rights of people and humanity and the shared humanity that we have. I'm interested in this idea that there's not really any great difference between what you can handle in a book for adults and a book for children, except probably the book for children should end with hope and should contain hope within it. But that, in a way, that's the responsibility, if that's probably not the right word, but you know, that's one of the things that should exist in a book for young readers. And it's certainly what I look for as a reader. I'm always despondent if there isn't hope in the books that I read. And I think this, I kind of feel that I want to apply the same judgment when looking at books for young readers as well, that you can deliver information and show some very tricky things, but at the same time you need the young reader to feel that they can succeed, they can overcome, they can, that, you know, their courage will carry them through.
Yeah, I completely agree, but I also look for that when I read books for grown-ups as well. I think that element of hope is really important. I really yeah, I get really annoyed when a book for grown-ups ends and is really ambiguous and has an ending that sort of leaves you hanging a bit. That you're like, oh, come on, like, give me a break. You wouldn't have done this if this had been a kid's book.
You wouldn't have been allowed to.
I think hope is such a powerful thing. I think hope is a really powerful thing. And I think you always have to have an element of it, even in the darkest of times. There is always that little nugget of hope that kind of sees you through.
Well, and I think particularly at the moment when we're all wrestling with different feelings of despair on certain occasions during this period, it's the hope that we can find in ourselves that things will get better that keeps us going. On that note, I'm going to ask a different sort of question to everybody to have a little think about, which is during the period of COVID and lockdown, have you been able to read? And if you have, what have you been reading? So I shall start with Kereen. Why don't you tell us if you've been...
I found it really difficult to read in lockdown, but I've also found it really difficult to write as well. So, you know, reading and writing, I found it quite difficult to focus, more than I've ever struggled with before. But what have I read? I read The Bells this year, I think that was this year. Who knows? It sort of blends into one, doesn't it? Last year and this year. Where did it start? Where did it end? Yeah. I'm reading The Deep Blue Between by Ayesha. And The Stars Were Burning Brightly. I read that as well by Danielle. So yeah, I've actually done okay. I thought I'd read less than that, but it has been really, really difficult to focus.
Hella, how about you? I know from your Instagram and you're a voracious reader. Have you found a support?
In the beginning of lockdown, I really had a hard time reading, I have to say. I like to listen to audiobooks, and that was easier, and especially some old favorites like I Captured the Castle and things like that. That always makes me feel better. So, but I think after a couple of months, I was back to reading a book a week or whatever I get through. And a lot of children's books, very, very few adult novels, I have to say, because I need the hope.
Yes.
But I've found it really difficult to write. I think I was lucky in the beginning of lockdown. I had the copy edits for The Hungry Ghost, so I really had deadlines. I had things I had to do, and that was fine. I could do that. But writing on something new was a lot more difficult.
Thank you. Susie, how about you? Have you been reading or?
Well, I was sort of lucky in that I had a deadline for the writing.
Work's helped us all, hasn't it?
Yeah, it does concentrate the mind beautifully. And so that was happening all the way through lockdown. And because I live on my own, I literally just focused on that for 3 solid months, I think. And also, I don't read whilst I'm writing very deliberately, because I can easily pick up somebody else's tone. I can steal their ideas without knowing it, all that kind of thing can go on. So in a sense, it kind of worked out okay for me because, I had something to do. I had a project which kept me going through the whole thing.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Liz, have you been sitting there surrounded by books?
Yeah, I struggled with concentration. I think I can normally be pretty focused, but I found it very hard in sort of early days of lockdown. But it's gradually come back, and I was redrafting my next book, which is a book for grown-ups. And I'd never written a book that big, so I've never redrafted a book that big. And I found that quite a challenge, actually. And like Susie, I think I have to be careful about what I'm reading when I'm redrafting, or I have to be careful about what I'm reading if I'm writing something. And then I was thinking about other ideas, and I did write the opening to a kind of a new young adult novel, and then I just thought, I don't know where this is going. I still don't quite know where it's going, but I hope to find out at some point.
So do we.
Yeah, I really want to know what happens next, but yeah. And then I've been doing some more kind of research as well. So I've been reading a lot about magicians at the moment, which is really interesting, actually. Victorian magicians.
Hold that thought, because that's my next question after finding out if Ayesha and Ele have been reading. Ayesha, what about you? I know you've got a little person.
When we went into lockdown, I was working on a nonfiction project, which has become sort of like a PhD thesis. I feel like it's never ending. And then when the world seemed to be ending, it just could not go back to it. It just seemed, even though the topic is so interesting to me and I've loved every bit of working on it, it seems so inconsequential. So I put that on hold, and then I struggled to read for a while. But what I found myself doing was going back to old favorites. So I picked up Like a Meal Bringing Ice Cream to the Sun by Sarah Odedina. She's British Nigerian. And it's a slim book, so I could read it and take my time and not feel like it was like bearing down on me. And it was really nice to reread that. And then from that, towards the end of confinement, or maybe we went into lockdown here, but it wasn't as bad as you had it on your end, because I live by the sea, so we could even walk to the beach. We weren't stuck indoors. And so towards the end, which was maybe in July over here, I got Woman Who Ran with the Wolves and actually finished that big volume. So I went from this to that. And in terms of writing, so the PhD thesis was put on hold, and I found myself looking for something light. I wanted to read something light, so I decided to write something light. And so I worked on a rom-com, a very fun romantic comedy, and I'm editing it now with a little fantastical twist. See how it goes.
Oh, fantastic. Well done. Ele, how about you?
I think, like so many people during lockdown, my life sort of felt very condensed and really intense. And like so many people during lockdown, suddenly I had children to homeschool, feeling utterly sort of unprepared for it. And they were in different school years. I'm sure this is something so many parents have experienced. So they were both each doing different things. And my husband was working from home. So everything was sort of happening in our house. All those things that happen in other places were all happening in our house. So life felt so sort of condensed and intense. And also I was working on my next novel. And so I had to sort of set myself different goals in terms of what I could expect to achieve in a day, in terms of writing, homeschooling. Could we have 3 meals prepared? and so for the first time in my life, I found I was reading more nonfiction. And at the moment I'm reading The Spy and the Traitor by Ben McIntyre. And I think I've been reading books like that because it's fact, but it's the kind of factual book that shows you a world that feels even crazier than perhaps what's happening now. I'm reading about this Russian double agent working in the heart of London under everyone's noses. I mean, it's a fantastic book. So that's what I'm reading at the moment, and I think that was my way of sort of dealing with the intensity of everything, was to read a bit more nonfiction than I normally do.
Oh, well, I've written down the title on my list of things that I'm looking forward to reading. Liz, you talked about research, and that was actually my next question, which is, do all books need research, or can we just make them up?
I think it depends what you're writing about. It depends what your world is and what setting you're in. I think if you're setting anything that has got an element in a real world, then unless you already know about that real world, then probably you might need to do some research. I mean, it's interesting with Bearmouth. So Bearmouth is set down a working coal mine, but it's inspired by a kind of Victorian history. And I unfortunately can't time travel back to Victorian times. Fortunately, possibly. So I did a load of research, and I spoke to miners. So I had a sense of how mining had changed over the centuries. But I always think it doesn't do any harm to do research. I think research is fascinating, and from research comes sort of new elements as well. I think for me, one of the reasons I like researching stuff so much is partly because I'm nosy. Like, I think all writers are nosy, right? Like with jackdaws, so it's like, oh, what's that shiny thing? And there are so many shiny things in research, so it can help inform the story. But I don't think everything needs it. It depends. It depends on you and your story and what your story is being told. But
yeah,
it's probably an element that would never do any harm. Even with something like science fiction, it's like, well, what's possible? You know, what is possible? How can I kind of make that into a story? That's a hard question.
it is a hard question. Ayesha, I think it's one that's quite pertinent for your book as well.
I love research. It's a rabbit hole. I go deep. I time travel. I actually time travel. So I find myself usually, like, depending on the project and how much time I have, I like to immerse myself. So I will read everything, newspaper clippings if I can find them. And when I was writing my third book, I really suffered to find like the point of view of my grandmother. So I worked around it. I read like missionary accounts. I read traveler accounts. I read chronicles about people's, the ethnic groups that I was writing about, their foundation stories. I read poetry, everything I could get my hands on. I look at postcards. I look at illustrations. I got very, very comfortable with like 19th century illustrators. I knew them by first name. So I could tell you that Rio did this in the Salaga market. And I love it. And it's a bit dangerous because you can get sucked into that world at the detriment of your writing. But to answer the other question, I feel like research, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt because I'm writing this romantic comedy, which is very contemporary. Well, not very, it's 2006. But I'm still finding myself reading about like voodoo culture because that's going to inform the book in some way or another. So I guess whatever you're writing about is deepened by research. Like even if it's a story you know intensely, just research whatever it is. If it's about your nail, you might be amazed by what nails can do, you know? So, I hear somebody coming up.
It's come to get his phone. I can see him.
I've got a good fact about fingernails. This is one of my all-time favourite facts for anything ever, which is that the moon is moving away from the Earth, and it's moving away at exactly the same rate that our fingernails grow. I think it's something like 4 centimetres a year.
Wow.
Yeah, genuinely.
Wow.
Amazing.
I'll leave that with you.
Wow.
Okay, that's going to take some thought.
Yeah.
So a bit of research had gone on to get that, I think, Liz, one way or another.
Let's not ask for that one.
No.
Hello. How did you even find that out?
I think I can't remember. So I was doing some workshops on space stuff because I am really interested in astronomy and space science and sort of space physics and dark matter and, you know, all of those kinds of things. And I think I can't remember where I found that out. It is true. I have looked it up. It is true.
Is your new book?
Another one I can tell you. Save them.
Susie, did you research any aspects of School for Nobodies? Because in a way, out of everybody's books, it's the most self-contained literary world. It's the one that's least touched by outside social elements in a way.
Yes, that's true. Really, for School for Nobodies, all that I researched in any detail was circus, because I wanted to know everything or a lot about circus for that. The book that I've just finished, which is called The Three Impossibles, is all about alchemy. So that involved a lot of research. And I actually sent off for a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to Alchemy.
If you work out how to do it, let us know.
But it's fascinating. It's such a fascinating subject. And when I'm researching, I know that most of the stuff that I've actually got through research isn't going to be used. But somehow it gives me some confidence to have that behind me, that it's there in the background. And then I'll just use a tiny little bit of it. But because I've got that sense of confidence, somehow it feels safer, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. It does. I think that's one of the lovely things about research, actually, is that how it can sort of buoy up your ideas It's
I think that's why I also immerse myself, because I don't want to be writing and researching at the same time. So I put myself in it, and then when I'm writing, I just let whatever I experience flow. So I'm not going back to check things. It's only like in fact checking and editing that I'll go back to the research.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, that's also shown in the light touch that the research has in your books, because when we read your books, adult or children, we don't feel that we're being given facts. We're getting a story in which the facts come. And I think that's one of the finer and more difficult things to do with books that rely on a lot of research, is for it not to feel like a lecture or an information book. I would like to know from you all, if you had the chance to tell yourself just one thing when you were starting out on your first book, now you're further down the line of having written other titles, what would you tell yourself?
Don't make your office your children's playroom.
What would you say? What was yours, Ellie?
Don't make your office your children's playroom.
That's good advice.
Fantastic food, which I'm not.
Well, that's great. Is that it? It really, that would be what you would tell yourself. Find a room of your own, Ellie.
Well, I thought that I could look after my kids and write, and I thought, doing it all in one room was a really clever. Actually, turns out not so much, and less time, but time that's uninterrupted. I think I would definitely choose that now, rather than trying to do both at once. Less interrupted time rather than the plastic food at speed.
Sucking things thrown at you. Thank you so much. Kereen, what about you? What advice would you impart to yourself?
Oh wow. I think I would probably tell myself to to not stress so much, but I don't know, even when you tell yourself don't stress, you still stress anyway. It's like telling someone not to panic, just saying it is not going to change it. But I know that I just stressed so much that I was running out of time, and every rejection, I took that personally, and that meant that I wasn't good enough to be a writer, and that people didn't like my work. And I really stressed a lot about whether I should be a writer or not, and whether to continue with it. And I think if I could give myself any advice, I would say just do if you love doing it, just do it. And no matter what happens, so, even if you keep getting rejections, you're still doing what you love, right? So just keep doing it. And as long as you're still enjoying it, then it's fine. And everything else is just extra, rather than the decisions of publishers and agents is the big thing that I'm waiting on, and I'm not enjoying writing. Does that make any sense? Like, I'm not in the moment writing and enjoying what I'm doing. Yeah, instead I'm focusing so much on, will I make it? Will they like my work? Will I get published? And not enjoying the journey so much.
Lovely. That would be lovely advice to give to a debut author, really, or an emerging author, in fact.
Yeah.
Debut. What about you, Liz? What would you tell yourself?
I mean, I wouldn't have listened anyway.
I'm to yourself.
Yeah, definitely, especially not to myself. I mean, I would have said what I always say to kind of people when I do creative writing, like workshops and stuff, is write from your heart and edit from your head. And, so that you're putting all that emotion in it, you're putting all your passion in it. But then when you're editing, you're kind of taking that step back and you're looking at it kind of more, I suppose, more sort of rationally, less emotionally. I wouldn't have listened to that. I mean, there's no way I would have listened to myself doing that and keep going. But I think, that is the most important thing. Kind of whatever advice you could give yourself I think most people probably wouldn't listen anyway, but the most important thing really is, I think, just to keep going, because it is by doing it that you get better. It is by doing it that you improve. It is by doing it that you realise what stories you want to tell, and by kind of evaluating and analysing and questioning sort of your tastes and what you like and why you like it. All of those things feed into it, and whether that's plays or books or films or TV series or music or poetry, whatever it is, it's all storytelling, and all of those things will feed into what you want to write as a writer. But there's no way I'd have listened to that when I was like 20.
Well, we'll just use that and tell other people then who are starting their first books. Thank you so much. What about you, Hella? What would you like to have known?
Oh, I would have liked to have known it was possible when I was young. I had never met an author. I didn't know it. I mean, it was always my dream. I was always a reader. I wasn't a writer. I didn't write in my spare time, but I would have loved to know that it was a possibility, because I didn't even try. I studied business and economics. I went into a business career and didn't start writing until I was in my 30s. So if I had kind of an idea that it was possible, I might have started 20 years earlier or something. I don't know. That would have been nice, because as you say, Sarah, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So
yeah, it's a long way.
It's been nice to have had some earlier years to start on.
Yeah. But it's never too late.
No, that's another thing. It's never too late.
Never too late. So
right, Susie?
I know.
Yes,
we can say that, right?
Talked about this before.
Absolutely, yeah. I can speak from deep personal experience that it's never too late. And what I'd say to myself as a younger writer would be, like Liz, I'd say don't give up. I'd also say don't be overly swayed and discouraged by other people's comments. Stay true to what you're doing. But I didn't sign with an agent until I was 66. So if anybody is a walking, talking example of not giving, of keeping going, and I've given up many times in the past, I've got to 48,000 words, I've got, and given up because somebody has said, that's not working, or this isn't working, or what have you. And because I've had so much self-doubt, I've just toppled over. Yeah. So I think that one of the most important things that any writer can do is to finish something. Certainly it was for me, and to keep finishing things, because every time you finish something, it's like a circle completes, a circle of energy completes, and then you know what you're capable of.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. Finally, Ayesha, your advice.
Oh, that was really good advice from everyone. I think I would have told 20-year-old Ayesha to play more, to not be so scared of breaking the rules, to not be so scared of failing, same as Susie, and to just play, to break the rules, to just try, and to note that it is a marathon and not a sprint. So you can take your time as well. You don't have to rush.
Thank you so much, everybody. Those are just beautiful answers. And it's 7:20, and we've got a slew of great questions. So I'm just having a quick flick through to see, okay, questions coming in. Is it necessary that the books are all set in various places around the world? Ghana, Nigeria, Brazil, Jamaica, Ethiopia, Singapore, and wonderful British set stories. Is it necessary to have worldly experience to help with success? No?
That's deep.
That is really deep. I don't.
Go ahead, Liz.
No, go on.
I just remember one of my mentors when I was writing my first book. He told me he wrote about a river in Ghana, and at the time he was living in Uganda, and he couldn't make it to Ghana because this was the 70s and travel was really difficult. So he just had somebody go and get maps for him. So using maps, he was able to chart out this river. So there's so much you can do with just imagination, and with Google Maps is amazing. I've been using it like crazy now. You don't really, I think as long as you can travel in your mind, good.
Yeah,
I'll leave it to the others to comment too.
Yeah, some of my favourite writers write about absolutely the world in which they know, the world, you know, the kind of the world around them, like Alan Garner. His stuff is always incredibly deeply rooted in, you know, his around Alderley Edge, where he lives, where he's always lived pretty much. And George Mackay Brown, who was an Orkney writer, who I think only left Orkney to go to university for a little bit and then went back.
Yeah.
And, you know, all of his stuff is very, very, very rooted in that landscape, in that world around him. And so I completely agree. No, not necessarily. It's
no. You just have to have a firm grip of your story, don't you?
But I would say if you are writing about a very different place, then it of course helps to have been there, to have all the sense impressions. So it's not just about sight and what you can read about it, but really having the feel of being there. For instance, for my book, the kind of the humidity of Singapore, how it can be so oppressive and really feel like you have this whole cloud layer pressing down on you, and all the sounds and all the tastes and the smells and everything, that you have that and can describe that, because it helps to immerse the reader so much more in the story. But other than that, there are wonderful books that are set in one house and never ever leaves that house for it.
Somebody has asked, does the inner judgmental voice or confidence change when you get a publisher, and then again when you start your second and third book?
I don't think it does.
You don't think it does?
But I'm just on my first book. Some of you guys are on your third, fourth, and fifth. But for me, I thought that when I got an agent, then I'd feel a lot more confident and a lot more secure in my writing. And that didn't happen, because then we were thinking of going out, sending out to publishers, and what would the publishers think, and would they like my work? So that inner voice, that fear, that insecurity was still there. And so I thought, so when I get a publishing deal, I'll be fine, I'll be confident. So I've got this deal, I'll feel great. I'll know for sure that what I do is good enough. But it doesn't, because you get a publishing deal and then you're thinking about the readers. You're like, but then it's going to come out and people are going to read it, and what are they going to think? And you've still got that, I've still got that fear and insecurity of, will they like it? Will they like my work? What if they don't like it? And now that I'm writing book 2, now I've still got that voice thinking, can I do the same thing again? Can I recreate what I've just done? Is it going to be good enough? Are people going to compare it to the first one? Are they not going to like it? Will I not be able to do what I did before? So for me, it doesn't go. It's just always there.
Thank you so much, Kereen. That's lovely to hear. It's great to hear. Ellie, what about for you? Because you're in an interesting situation in that you were an editor.
Yeah.
And you edited lots of really wonderful authors, including launched the career of Sarah Crossan, who of course is a complete household name now. And we've just finished editing your third book. So we're seeing the Ele Fountain shelf get bigger as well. How does it feel for you, having in a way the sort of two halves to your brain, an editorial half and an authorly half? And does the editor in you let the author off, or is she very strict? And
it was a very curious situation to begin with, and I can remember sitting down with you and my agent thinking, where's the author? So it was very strange to find myself turning from editor to author and seeing things which I had seen as an editor completely from the other side. And I did worry very much about being edited the first time, because I didn't know if I would enjoy it. I didn't know how I'd feel about it actually. But in fact, I loved the editing process, Sarah, because you truly realise that you reach a point when you're writing a book beyond which you can go no further. And even if it feels you know, you're really happy with what you've written, you know that there are things there that you can't see yourself. And I found the editing process really actually very cathartic, really revealing, and you think, oh yeah, so that's the thing I do. And I suppose because I'd spent 16 years editing other authors' books, I actually found it very quite fascinating to see which words I kept repeating, you know, my little tics. But I suppose it also really helped me because I'd seen authors really struggling, not knowing if they could finish what they were writing, or having writer's block, going through all these things, which are, you know, extremely stressful, and you can help. But I think authors will agree that it at times feels like it's just you on your own, however much help you're getting, because you know, you're the one who has to write the book ultimately. But what I took from that is that every single one of those authors finished their book. And I think that for me was very encouraging, because I thought, yes, there are different obstacles for every author to overcome, yet every author finished their book, and those books were published. And I think that gave me a sort of confidence. If I was having a difficult day, I thought, well, okay, everyone talks about ideas and having ideas and how that's the hard part, but actually it is about, I think what Susie was saying earlier, it's about perseverance. It's about keeping at it and realizing you have to, it's a job, and you have to set yourself goals, and if that's not working for you, set smaller goals until you start to feel good about what you're doing, and you will get there. And those 40,000 words, you know, will start to seem like less of a mountain to climb. And I think that helped me, having been an editor, to see people managing to get over that mountain really helped me as an author.
Great, thank you. Liz and Ayesha, it's interesting to address this question to you both as well, because you've both got adult and children's books. Liz, your adult book hasn't published yet, but it was how much did writing one age group help you have the confidence to write another? Ayesha, you came from adult into young adult books.
I mean, I was petrified when I met you, Sarah, and I wanted to write for young adults, but I was like, will I be able to do this? Because I think of myself as a reader, as a young reader, and you need to be authentic. The writer really does need to be authentic. I think there are certain things that maybe adult readers, I don't know, I'm just saying this, that can fly with adult readers, but I feel like with younger readers, you won't get away with. Or maybe it's flipped, I don't know, but no, that's the way.
I think you're right. I think young readers are very critical.
Yeah.
Very quick to give up something if they feel it's shallow or a sham or.
Exactly. But what I did was I do what I do with every single novel, and I just took the reader out of my head. And there's a book I like to teach with when I do creative writing workshops and when I'm starting a project, and it's Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And my favorite chapter is one on writing bad first drafts. I think there are children in the audience, so I won't use the word she uses. But just write a bad first draft. You banish all those voices, whether they're internal or your auntie's voice who's like, you should get a job and you're not good at this. Just banish all those voices and then just write a first draft that nobody needs to read. So I did the same thing with this book as I'd done with the two previous books that when I learned this method of writing. And it helps. I think you come back in the editing process and you battle the demons again, and it's a constant fight. But that way of writing didn't change because I'd switched from adult literature to young adult literature. It was the same process for me.
Can I ask you something about that bad first draft? Do you edit into it or do you throw it away and start all over again?
Well, I can't do that. Some people throw away entire drafts, and I'm like, you're a brave person. Maybe I'd have done that before having a child, but now that I have a 4-year-old in my life, it's so precious.
Don't confuse your first draft with your son. That's my advice.
But I do throw away chunks of those chapters, but I don't even throw them away. I put them in another folder, and I'm like, okay, discards or like to come back to, because I feel like you will use them again for something or the other down the line. Because there were definitely things from the 100 Wells that made their way into the deep blue because I didn't throw away. So,
well, also, it was 100 Wells that I'd read before I met you that made me think, oh, this woman should write books for young readers. It's 7:30, but there's a really good question here that I want to ask. So we're going to go over a little bit. I'm sorry about that. Let me find it. Somebody has asked, as an all-women group of writers here, how many of our central characters are women or female, and is there a worry? Okay, we have a collection of female writers, and I assume your main characters are all girls, which is wonderful. Exactly. I'm greatly in favor of strong female characters, but do you worry that young boys might be feeling left out of contemporary young literature? I am going to ask Ellie, because Ellie's books do have boys in them. And then I'm going to ask Liz to comment on this because of the wonderful character of Newt. So Ellie, what do you think? What are boys not getting a look in books for young readers?
I think that there is definitely the perception that perhaps boys are less enthusiastic readers than girls, but especially perhaps around about year 7, year 8 onwards. But I have to say that my own experience, having written Schiff as the main character in Boy 87, he's a boy, and the story focuses on him and his friend, who's also a boy. And having subsequently visited many schools to talk about Boy 87, I honestly noticed no difference in terms of engagement, interaction, hands up, enthusiasm between the girls and the boys, which I just found incredibly heartening, actually. And yeah, I loved going to these schools and seeing actually the equality in engagement between girls and boys, and perhaps that is just my experience because I've written my first book had boys as essential characters, and I when I was thinking about writing Boy 87, didn't that Schiff, to have a boy as a central character. This Schiff arrived and he was a boy, and then subsequently I wrote a book with a girl as a central character,
with very strong boy characters alongside her. Oh, we're losing Ellie, I think. Can other people hear her? Is it just me? Oh, I'm sorry. We'll come back. But Liz, tell us, boys.
Yeah, but I think
your book. Sorry, Ellie, you were freezing.
Oh,
sorry.
My internet connection is unstable. It's telling me.
Thank you, though. Thank you so much for your answer. Liz, what about your feeling about boy readers and boy characters?
I think there are a lot of boy characters out there. There are a lot of male authors as well. I think I agree with Ellie. There's a perception that boys are more reluctant to read books with female characters as the leads in. I don't think that's necessarily true. And I also don't think that's necessarily something that should be encouraged. I mean, I'm sure when I was a kid, and when a lot of the people who were watching this were kids as well, you read whatever books were there, whatever books you get your hands on, with whoever was the lead. I mean, Bearmouth is, my protagonist in it, Newt, describes themselves as neither one thing or another. So Newt is, I think the default understanding of Newt is that Newt is a boy, really. But it's been interesting because most of the feedback that I've had from individual readers who've sent me fan mail. I've had fan mail. It's so cute. I love getting fan mail. No one tells you this. Fan mail is the best. They're all boys. They're actually all boys. Which it's quite interesting. And like Ellie, when I've kind of done events in schools and with young people are interested in the story. They're interested in the themes. They're interested in the kind of the characterizations of the character rather than the gender. And I think particularly with a lot of the younger ones growing up now, they're much more fluid about so many ideas than, like I say, than my generation were. And don't think those same kind of rules necessarily apply. Really.
No, thankfully. I suspect that young people were always more fluid. The gatekeepers were probably just more ferocious in the past, and we've had to move over as gatekeepers and admit that young people actually do know what they want and have strong and wise opinions. And I also think in the last 10, 15 and 20 years, the quality of literature for young people has just each year gets better and better and better, in terms of the range of subjects, the range of characters, the courage of the writers that are now allowed to have voice in the publishing field. I think the gatekeepers aren't they're not given so much power. They're having to respond to what the audience says it wants, and that is such a long time coming. Thank God for it. And I'm going to let you all go. And thank you so much. I actually suspect we could probably keep chatting for, well, I could keep hearing you, listening to you but all talk for an awful lot longer. And I've got a lot of other questions, so maybe we'll arrange another round table in the not too distant future. Ayesha, Kereen, Liz, Ellie, Susie and Hella, thank you so much for calling in from all the places that you came from. And we've got so many questions that embarrassingly the screen is just rushing up and up and up beside me. And so there's so many people that I haven't addressed their questions, but thank you audience very much for listening to us. And let's all keep in touch. So good night, everybody. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.